Good morning, everybody. We're reading Bud, Not Buddy, also as a way to study the Great Depression. Ooh, I'm looking at myself. It's like I haven't been shaving because I've been inside. Ooh, I'll shave for tomorrow, okay? We're reading Bud, Not Buddy to help study the Great Depression, which was 1929 to 1940 in America. Now, technically, we're supposed to be studying California. California was very much hit by the Great Depression and had its own part to play. But I was just watching the John Green Crash Course History video on the Great Depression, which I'm going to assign on Tuesday. And he made a point of saying it's hard to understand the Great Depression because it's super complex. And even for college kids who study it, we like to teach history, he says, would make simple narratives. This happened because of this. The Great Depression was a moment in history where a lot of things came together. And I think at your age, it's important to try to understand some of these things, so there may be a little bit of a stretch. The big deal with the Depression was what they call massive unemployment. And that means a lot of people were out of work. And when a lot of people are not in work, they're not spending money. And when people aren't spending money, the stores don't get money. Then the store doesn't get money to pay the farmer for the apples he grew. Then the farmer doesn't pay the guy who puts gas in his truck to bring the apples. Do you see what I mean? There's this whole movement of money around that starts to really slow down and then stop. And what I'm talking about right here is called economics. So we're going to introduce that. I'll just get right to reading. That was enough of an introduction for today. But you should know, Bud Not Buddy is definitely about the Great Depression, as well as other issues. And the Great Depression, people were having a hard time because there weren't jobs. And there wasn't a lot of money to pay people to go around. That's really the bottom line. Okay, I'm going to read chapter 4 and 5 together because they're both really short. They hadn't locked the kitchen window. It slid open with just a couple of squeaks. Then I was inside the Amos house, crouched down like a cat burglar. Quick as a rabbit, I looked under the table to see if they'd moved my suitcase. It was still there. I got a whole lot calmer when I picked it up, and it was the right weight. I didn't think they'd taken anything out of it. I couldn't be sure until I looked inside, but I could do that later. I took a deep breath and looked over to the icebox. An icebox was the refrigerator at the time. My dad used to talk about having one. It was this like big thermos-like box, and it didn't have electricity. You'd get a chunk of ice from an ice cellar, and you'd stick it in there, and it would work, and it would keep food cold, and the ice was so big it would melt slowly, and it was the ice box. I wanted to see if the shotgun was still there. I let all the air out in a big puff when I saw it. Shucks. You'd think with the Amoses being so doggone mean, they'd worry about living a big old gun like that out in the open. What if one of their visitors got real mad about them or something? I unlocked the back door and set my suitcase on the first step of the porch so I could make a quick getaway after I was through paying them back. I opened the screen door quiet and went into the house. Fair is fair. The Amoses deserved what they were going to get. I can't all the way blame Todd for giving me trouble, though. If I had a regular home with a mother and a father, I wouldn't be too happy about other kids coming to live in my house either. Being unhappy about it is one thing, but torturing the kid who are there, even though they don't want to be, is another. It was my job to make sure other kids who didn't know where their mothers and fathers were didn't have to put up with Todd Amos one more time. My heart started jumping around in my stomach as I reached for the shotgun. It was heavier than I thought it would be. I lifted up, and I felt how solid this smooth brown bore was against my shoulder. With it up close to my face, I could smell the gray metal and the gun oil. I aimed the gun at the stove and pretended I was shooting an elephant or a dragon or a tiger. I imagined how it would feel to creep up to Todd's bed while I was sleeping and put it in under his nose and see how he felt. After that, I'd have to do some quick moving to get at the grown-up Amoses. Unless they were real sound sleepers, the shotgun going off in Todd's room would give them a clue something was going on. So I lowered the gun. These things are just too dangerous to play with or even take chances. That's why the first part of my revenge plan was to get this gun out of the way. If something went wrong and the Amoses woke up, I didn't want them rushing down to the kitchen to get the gun. I knew they'd shoot me in a flash and tell the home it was an accident. I took the gun outside and I put it on the back porch in a corner where they couldn't see it until daytime. I felt better it was out of my hands. When I was back in the kitchen, I started looking for drinking glasses. The first one I opened up was a jelly jar they'd given me to drink out of at supper time. I walked over to the sink and turned on one of the spigots. They had hot running water in the house. I let it run for a second to warm up. I put a dish rag in the bottom of the sink, splashed, and wasn't too loud. When the water was good and hot, I stuck the jelly jar underneath it, filled to the brim. I started down the hall. Todd's door came open easy. I tiptoed over to his bed. He was in deep sleep, and his hands were crossed on his chest like he was ready for the graveyard. I dipped my middle finger in the water. Perfect temperature. I held my breath, and I picked up one of his hands. One of the older boys at the home told me if you dipped someone's hand in a warm glass of water while they're asleep, they don't have any choice but to pee in their bed. It was something about chemistry and biology making some valve in your guts open up and boop, you got a wet bed. I started to dip Todd's fingers in the water, but I couldn't dip more than 2 at a time. He stayed dry. I tried holding his hand flat and pouring water over it. He still didn't wet the bed. Finally, I just decided to pour the water on his pajama pants. I pulled the blanket and sheet down, and I emptied the jar. His face twitched a couple times, and for a minute it looked like his eyes were going to come open, but they stayed shut. He smiled, and warm water from the jelly jar opened his little valve up. He soaked his sheets. I tiptoed out of the room and down the hall. My favorite saying in the world is, "He who laughs last laughs best." So I put my hand over my mouth and I whispered, "Ha ha ha ha." I picked up my suitcase and I walked into the street. Man, I was on the lam. It was just like Public Enemy number 1. If J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI saw me now, I'd be in some serious hot water. Okay, rolling right into the next chapter. Being on the lam is a whole lot of fun for 5 minutes. Every time my heart beat, I could feel blood pushing hot and hard on the inside of my sting spots and on my hand. I couldn't let it slow me down. I had to get out of this neighborhood fast. I knew a nervous-looking kid with all swollen up with stings and blood dripping from a fish head bite on his finger, carrying a raggedy old suitcase, did not look like he belonged here. The only hope I had was the North Side Library. If I got there, maybe Miss Hill would be able to help me. Maybe she'd understand and tell me what to do. For now, all I could do was sneak into the library's basement to sleep. It was a lot later than I'd ever been up before, and I was kind of scared the cops would catch me. I had to be careful, even if it was in the middle of the night. Even if I was crouching down, sneaking along the street like pretty boy Floyd. At the library, I walked past a row of giant Christmas trees that were planted on the side of the building. There was a door on the side with a light above it, so I kept walking in the shadows. When I got back to the back windows, I almost busted out crying. Somebody had put metal bars on them. Even though I knew I was useless tugging at the bars, they were the real McCoy, totally solid. I headed back to the trees. They were low enough from the ground that no one could see me unless they were really looking. I opened up my suitcase. Most folks don't have sense enough to carry a blanket around them, but you never know when you might be sleeping under a Christmas tree at the library, so I had one in my suitcase. I untied the strange knots that the Amos had put in my twine, and I opened the suitcase. I could tell right away that someone had been fumbling through my things. First off, whenever I put the blanket in, I always fold it so it stops against the other things from banging each other. They just stuffed it in. They didn't pay any mind. I lifted the blanket out and saw that everything was still there. You might say that the Amoses were mean old folks, but you couldn't call them thieves. I picked up the old tobacco bag that I keep my rocks in. I could tell by the drawstring that pulled them the Amoses had been poking through this too. I jiggled it up and down a couple of times, and I felt it like none of the rocks were missing, but I opened them up to count them anyway. All my rocks were there. None of them were gone. The Amoses hadn't heard it. I except pulled Mama's picture out of the envelope, and I kept it in a pile and held it so the lights the library side would shine on it. Running across the top was a sign that was written on a long, skinny flag, "Boys and girls, follow the gentle light to Miss Begotten Moon Park." Underneath the sign between two wagon wheels in the picture was Mama. She was about as old as I am now, and she was looking down and she was frowning. I can't understand why she was so unhappy. This park looked like a fun place to be. But in the picture, Mama was sitting on a real live little midget horse. It looked tired and dragged out like those big horses do, but it had a teeny body with a big sag, where most horses have a straight back. Mama was sitting in the middle of the horse's back, but she was riding side saddle, but there wasn't any saddle. And I know that somebody... Oh, and she had 2 6-shooter pistols in her hands, and the way her face looked, you could tell she wished she'd emptied them on somebody. I know who that somebody was. Mama told me it was her father, my granddad. He'd gone and ruined everybody's fun that day by getting in a big fight with my mother about a gigantic white 25-gallon Texas cowboy hat that she was wearing. Mama used to tell me that hard-headed man insisted, mind you, that I wear that horrible hat. The hat was almost as big as Mama, and you could see it was fake and as tall, and it was no real cowboy could have wore that thing without getting it knocked off his head. Mama told me that some man used to drag the midget horse all the way through the neighborhood with a camera, and if your mommy or daddy signed a piece of paper, he'd take some pictures of you. They'd come back in a couple of weeks, and you could buy them. Mama wasn't looking like she had rocks in her jaw, because the hat was so fake that a real cowboy would have laughed out of town for wearing it. When she used to tell me about this photo, her eyes would get big and burny, like the whole thing happened the day before instead of years ago. She'd start moving around the apartment quick, picking things up and putting things down in the same spot. Why, this place is alive with germs. Who knows what type of people had worn it? I don't know, Mama, I'd say. She'd say, who knows how many years had been worn by how many sweaty little heads? I don't know, Mama. The entire band of that hat was inside, and I'm sure it was crawling with lice and tetters. Yes, Mama. And that horrid little photographer didn't care. Do you ever imagine it occurred to him to wash that hat? No, Mama, of course. Of course we meant less to him than a horse. Yes, Mama. But your grandfather insisted I wear this hat. To this day, I cannot understand, but why he insisted. Yes, Mama. We had that conversation a lot of times. And if you notice, this book, this is one thing that's a little difficult, but really appropriate for your age about this book. It moves in and out of the past, present, and what he's thinking in his mind really quickly without a cue. They don't say, this is a memory of him looking at the picture of his mama, and this is him interpreting what his mama is feeling in the picture. You have to clue in. So now we're in the present. Well, I think. Me and Mama having this conversation lots of times is one of the main things I can remember about her now. Maybe that's because when she'd tell me these things, she used to squeeze my arms and look hard in my face and make sure I was listening. But maybe I remember them only because of the arm-squeezing, facing-me times were the only times that things slowed down a minute when Mama was around. Everything moved very fast when Mama was near. She was like a tornado, never resting. The only time stuff didn't blow around was when she'd squeeze my arms and tell me things over and over. She had 4 favorite things to tell me. One of them was about the picture. Another one was about my name. She said, Bud, your name. Bud is your name. And don't you ever let anyone call you anything outside of that. Especially don't let anyone call you Buddy. I may have some problems about being stupid. I may have problems, but being stupid isn't one of them. And I would have added DY onto the end of your name if I intended it to be there. I knew what I was doing. Buddy is a dog's name, or a name that someone's going to use if their best friend falls. Your name is Bud, not Buddy. Okay, Mama, I'd say. And she'd say that every single time. And do you know what a bud is? Yes, Mama. A bud is a flower to be, a flower in waiting for the right warmth and care to open it up. It's a little fist of love waiting to unfold and be seen by the world. That is what a bud is. A bud is a little flower waiting to expand and grow. Yes, Mama. I know she didn't mean it by naming me after a flower, but I'm not going to tell anybody about it. Another thing she'd tell me was, don't you worry, Bud. As soon as you're a young man, I have a lot of things to explain to you. That didn't calm me down at all. And that was Bud Caldwell's Rules and Things to Have a Funner Life and Make a Better Life of Yourself, number 83. If adults tell you not to worry, and you weren't worried before, you better hurry up and start worrying because you're already late. She'd tell me, these things I'm going to explain to you later will be a great help to you. Then she'd look at my face, grab a hold of my arms real tight and say, Bud, I always want you to remember, no matter how bad things look to you, no matter how dark the night, when one door closes, don't worry, another one opens. That's really good advice for these times, isn't it? I'm going to read that quickly again. No matter how bad things look to you, no matter how dark the night, when one door closes, don't worry, because another one opens. What, it opens all by itself? Yes, it seems so, she said. Another door opens. That was supposed to have helped me? I should have known then I was in for a lot of trouble. But actually in this book, that turns out what happens. It's funny now that I'm 10 years old, and just about a man I can see Mama was so wrong. She was wrong because probably should have told me things I thought I was too young to hear. Because now she's gone, and I'll never know what they were. Even if I was too young back then, I could have memorized them and used them when I need help, like right now. But one door is opening for him. He just doesn't see it. And these things take time, and they're mysterious and all that stuff. By now, I'm almost grown, and I see Mama wasn't talking about doors to let ghosts in your bedroom. She meant doors like the one at the home closing, and the other door leading to the Amos's opening, and the door in the shed leading to me sleeping under a tree and getting ready to open the next door. I checked the other things in my suitcase, and they seemed okay. I felt a lot better. Right now, I was too tired to think any more, so I closed my suitcase. I put the proper knots back in the twine, I crawled under the Christmas tree, and I wrapped myself in a blanket. I'd have to wake up early if I wanted to get to the mission in time for breakfast. If you were 1 minute late, they wouldn't let you in for food. Right, and that's the end of that chapter. He's talking about a bread line where a lot of people ate during the Great Depression. We will leave it there. Thank you for following the story. It gets better and better and better and better. And it unfolds a lot of history from this cool perspective of Bud, not Buddy.